If you ever find yourself in an emergency room after midnight, I want you to look closely at the receptionist behind the glass. Notice how they rarely look you directly in the eyes when they take your ID. Notice how their gaze constantly darts to the security monitors, or how they seem to hold their breath when the automatic double doors slide open. You might think they're just tired or cynical. But there is a secret safety protocol whispered among night shift staff in hospitals across the country. It's a rule not written in any official employee handbook, but breaking it has a 100% casualty rate. The rule is simple: if a patient checks in, and you cannot hear them breathe, do not look them in the eyes. And under no circumstances do you touch them. My name is Sarah, and for 3 years, I thought this was just a cruel hazing ritual for new night shift receptionists. Until October 14th. That was the night I broke the rule. And that was the night I realized, some things that walk into an ER aren't looking for a doctor. They're looking for a replacement. To understand what happened, you have to understand how a hospital changes after 2 a.m. The bustling, heroic environment you see on television dies. The hallways shrink. The fluorescent lights hum with a low, vibrating frequency that makes your teeth itch. At St. Jude's Memorial, the night shift receptionist desk is encased in 3-inch thick bulletproof plexiglass. Most people think it's to protect us from aggressive, drug-seeking patients. But on my first night, the veteran receptionist, Marcus, pointed at a small, circular hole at the bottom of the glass, the only opening meant for passing insurance cards. Marcus looked me dead in the face and said, "If someone comes in after 3, and their skin looks too tight for their bones, you do not use the intercom. You don't speak. You slide a pen through that hole, and you let them write. If they can't write, you tell them the systems are down and walk away. Do not look up at them." At the time, I laughed. I thought Marcus was just trying to freak out the new girl. But as the months went on, I noticed things. The temperature drops. Every night around 3:15 a.m., the reception area would suddenly plunge into freezing temperatures, even though the hospital's climate control was locked at 72 degrees. The missing patients, our digital log would occasionally show, patient checked in, on a kiosk terminal, but when we looked at the waiting room, the chairs were entirely empty. The static, the security cameras facing the entrance doors would predictably glitch, turning into a wall of gray static for exactly 60 seconds, every single night, at 3:33 a.m. For 2 years, I followed Marcus's advice out of pure, superstitious instinct. Until the night of October 14th, when the rain was pouring so hard it sounded like gravel hitting the roof, and the exhaustion finally caught up to me. It was 3:20 a.m. I had been working a double shift, surviving entirely on stale coffee and adrenaline. The waiting room was dead silent. I was staring at my monitor, watching the cursor blink, fighting to keep my eyelids open. Then, the automatic doors slid open. A rush of freezing, damp air swept into the lobby. I shivered, expecting to see a wet paramedic or a shivering unhoused person seeking shelter. Instead, a man stepped inside. He wore a pristine, vintage charcoal suit. It looked completely dry, despite the torrential downpour outside. But his movement wasn't right. Have you ever seen a marionette puppet where the puppeteer is pulling the strings just a fraction of a second too late? That's how he walked. His knees didn't bend naturally. his shoulders tilted at an awkward, rigid angle. He stopped 10 feet from my desk. Remembering Marcus's warning, I kept my eyes firmly glued to my computer screen. I could feel his presence. The air in the room grew so cold my breath began to mist in front of my face. "Name and date of birth?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No response. Just the sound of the heavy rain outside. No, wait, that wasn't right. There was the rain, but inside the lobby, there was no sound. No hum of the vending machine. No air conditioning. And most terrifyingly, no sound of breathing. I cleared my throat, trying to sound professional. "Sir, I need your name to check you in." Still, silence. Then, a voice came. But it didn't sound like it came from his mouth. It sounded like it was being projected directly into my skull. It was a wet, rattling whisper. "My chest is empty. I need you to feel it." Against every survival instinct I had, my eyes drifted up from the monitor. I couldn't stop myself. The curiosity was like a physical pull, dragging my gaze upward. I looked at his face. My heart stopped. His skin was the color of curdled milk, stretched so tightly over his skull that his lips pulled back into a permanent, artificial grin. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. They weren't normal. His pupils were so blown, so entirely black, that they consumed his entire iris. There was no light reflection in them. It was like looking into two bottomless, empty drill holes. I was trapped in his stare. I couldn't blink. I couldn't scream. Slowly, the man raised his hand and slid it through the small circular hole at the bottom of the plexiglass. His fingers were long, gray, and tipped with bruised, blackened fingernails. He rested his hand on my desk, palm up. "Check my pulse," the voice whispered in my head. "Please." In my sleep-deprived, terrified state, my brain short-circuited. I wanted him gone. I wanted this nightmare to end. I reached my hand out, my fingers trembling, and I pressed my index and middle fingers against his wrist to find a pulse. Nothing. There was no warmth. No throbbing artery. Touching his skin felt like pressing my hand against a block of dry ice wrapped in wet leather. It was completely dead. And then, his fingers snapped shut around my wrist. The grip was inhuman. It didn't feel like a hand, it felt like a metal vice clamping down, crushing my bones. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat. His black eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw my own reflection in them. But my reflection wasn't screaming. My reflection in his eyes was smiling. With a surge of panic-induced adrenaline, I grabbed a heavy metal stapler from my desk and slammed it down onto his hand through the hole. The grip instantly released. The man didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. He slowly retracted his hand back through the opening, took one step backward, and then, he simply collapsed. Not like a man falling, but like an empty suit of clothes dropping to the floor. Within seconds, the night supervisor, Dave, came rushing out of the back office. He had heard my stapler hit the desk. "Sarah." "What happened?" he yelled. I was sobbing, pointing at the floor in front of the desk. "He's right there. The man in the suit." He grabbed me. Dave looked at the floor, then looked back at me, his face pale with confusion. "Sarah, there's no one there." I looked. The floor was completely empty. No body. No water puddles from the rain. Nothing. But my wrist was burning. I pulled back my sleeve. Clamped tightly around my skin were 5 distinct, black and blue bruises. The perfect imprint of an icy, skeletal hand. We pulled up the security footage from that night. I watched myself on the screen. At 3:20 a.m., the automatic doors opened on their own. On the video, I start talking to empty air. At 3:23, I reach my hand out and press my fingers against the empty desk. And then, the footage shows my wrist violently twisting, suspended in midair, as if held by an invisible force, before I strike the desk with the stapler and fall backward. There was absolutely no one there. I resigned from St. Jude's the very next morning. I moved to a different city, took a day job, and swore I would never step foot in a hospital at night again. But here is the part that keeps me awake at night. The doctors told me the bruises on my wrist were just a severe case of contact dermatitis or a burst blood vessel from stress. But I know what I felt. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, and the room gets suddenly, inexplicably cold, I feel a faint, icy pressure around my wrist. Like something is still holding onto me, waiting for me to look back. So, the next time you find yourself in an ER waiting room late at night, and you see the receptionist refusing to look you in the eye, don't get angry. Don't think they're being rude. They are just trying to make sure that whatever is standing behind you doesn't follow them home. Have you ever seen something in a hospital that you couldn't explain? Or maybe you've worked the night shift yourself. Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to survive the night, hit that subscribe button and don't look back.